Well, it's a very, very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Sure, it really is a pleasure to be in your company and also the company of Mandla Langa. We're going to be discussing his new book, The Lost Language of the Soul. To be speaking to a best-selling author on a Tuesday afternoon during your lunch break is really such a pleasure. Well, my name is Refiloe Mpakanyane. I'm a broadcaster and avid reader, and perhaps you know me from my weekend breakfast radio show on 702. Hope you do. But just a reminder that we won't be able to hear you, right, as we undertake this discussion. But what you can do is take part in the conversation by putting your questions, your comments, comments in the chat box of the Zoom screen, or put your questions in the Q&A section. Either way, let's just, get this conversation going. Please take part and please do ask anything that you would like of Mandla Langa. We really want to do that. So we'll be taking your questions and fielding them in the latter part of our discussion. We'll chat for about 30 minutes, and then we'll do the Q&A for about 10 minutes at the end of our conversation. So just look for those buttons at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll be able to find everything there. A little bit of further housekeeping. The book, The Lost Language of the Soul, is available from virtual and physical bookstores. All your decent bookstores out there, you know what they are. And you can also get the book, the ebook, on Amazon, as well as Amazon Kindle or on Kobo. So Pan will post the links in the chat, and you'll get an email out the day after the launch, as well as a link to the recording of our discussion and all the details of how you can get your very own copy. So just be cognizant of that. But let me take this opportunity right now to say a very, very big good afternoon and welcome to Mr. Mandla Langa. It's such a pleasure to be in your company today.
The pleasure is mine, Refiloe. I've been looking forward to meeting you. I also am a fan of your radio work. Thanks so much for doing this.
Speaking of being a fan and having looked forward to something, this discussion is one that I'm going to try and crunch all the questions into this half hour. And as I was saying to you, whilst we're in the green room, in the waiting room for the Zoom discussion, that, there's never enough time for these things. So just a quick reminder to everyone, put your questions in the Q&A box, and let's see if we can get your perspective, your insights into this conversation. Please, 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 and just get the most out of Mandla whilst we have him on this platform. But I'm going to do this, and I'm loath to do so because we all actually know why we're here and who the man of the hour is. But a short sort of bio on Mandla Langa. Born in Durban, grew up in KwaMashu, holds an MA in creative writing from the University of the Witwatersrand. In 1980, he won the drum story contest for The Dead Men Who Lost Their Bones. And in 91, he was awarded the Arts Council of Great Britain bursary for creative writing, the first for a South African. Mandla's works, or published works, include Tenderness of Blood, Rainbow on a Paper Sky, The Naked Song and Other Stories, The Memory of Stones, as well as the award-winning The Lost Colors of the Chameleon, and of course the book the best-selling text Jar of Shadows, that was 2014, and of course the book that we are discussing today, which is The Lost Language of the Soul. I'm going to start off by thanking you for this book, for this novel, and the time that you took to, I think, add to a very important canon of work, and that is the fictionalized account or recounting of that very interesting period, the latter part of the struggle for liberation in South Africa, but also the initial phase of the transition to democracy. I guess a silly question, but why did you feel compelled to write The Lost Language of the Soul?
Well, there were so many things happening in our country, and I would want to believe that the events of 2008 and 2015, when there was a lot of xenophobic violence against guarded legals, etc. At the time. And I then started to think that there must be a way we can personalize, we can make real the identities of people that we regard as outliers, who are part and parcel of our souls and of our blood. And that was the genesis of the story. And the fact that 1985, when the story begins, was one of the bloodiest years in the struggle inside South Africa, elsewhere, because the raids, the bombardments, there is something that has been left unsaid, has been left unrecorded and unremarked upon, that I felt needed to be brought into our consciousness as South Africans.
Yeah, unrecorded and unremarked upon. I guess, yeah, very, very, very key words that you use there. And, or if not completely unrecorded, then little remarked upon, and not enough said about it. I just want to start off with a very, very simple basis of, I guess, any kind of book discussion by reading the blurb of the book. For those that are excited to read it, but have yet to actually pick up a copy of it. And it goes like this. Joseph Mabaso is used to his father Sobhuza's long absences from the family home in Lusaka. Sobhuza is a freedom fighter and doing important work, and Joseph has learned not to ask questions. But when Chanda, his mother, disappears without a trace, leaving him and his siblings alone, Joseph knows that something is terribly wrong. And so begins a journey, physically arduous and dangerous and emotionally fraught, that no 14-year-old boy should have to undertake alone. Following the most tenuous of threads, Joseph finds some unlikely guides along the way: courageous Layla and her horses, Sis Violet and the guerrilla unit she commands, Mr. Chikwedere, stonecutter and illicit trader, Madala at the Lesedi repatriation camp, who helps him find his voice, and Auntie Susie Juma, unofficial Zambian ambassador in Yeoville, Johannesburg, whose detective skills are legendary. As Joseph navigates unfamiliar and often hostile territory in his search for his parents, he's on a parallel journey of discovery, one of identity and belonging, as he attempts to find a safe house that is truly safe, a language that understands all languages, and a place in his soul that feels like home. Well, this book certainly feels like home, right? It is dangerous, it is treacherous, it is full of love and bravery, and it's full of uncertainty. And I guess that's the South African, if not the African condition. Pre-democracy, pre-liberation, and post. Are these feelings, to talk and ask the author, are these feelings that you relate to still and can access easily in 2021?
Well, one person, I think it was Wally Sirote, the poet, who said that freedom was not free. And for me, it's very important to remind us that there were so many other forces, so many other elements outside. And how best then to talk about those forces, those influences, those elements, then seeing them through the point of view, through the eye of a 14-year-old boy. And for me, it was important to create a 14-year-old boy because this is somebody on the cusp of, how do you say this, adulthood. Yeah. And we are always on the cusp of something as a people. South Africa is what, 27 years old now, yes, as a new democracy. And that's a very young age, really, for any country. So we're on the cusp of something. We've got all these acne and hormonal imbalances, and it bespeaks of an advancement of a people towards something. So this boy represents all that for me.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it's always important to reflect on the joys, the travails. I think it was someone who wrote, for their triumphs and their tears. You know, all those elements or those aspects of our lives which pull and push, but which makes us what we are, a resilient people, perhaps a messed up people, but at the end of the day, people that have got a lot to hope for. That's one of the reasons the book was written.
I think definitely a messed up people, and people, and as is everyone, I think, right? Isn't that part of the realization of growing up and becoming an adult, that you have to drop your expectations of perfection and coming to terms with your blemishes. And if you're going to get through this life thing, you understand you're not going to get through it unscathed, at least from my almost 40-year-old perspective. I don't know, correct me in the chat if you disagree. And that's exactly what you talk about, the fact that our young protagonist, Joseph Mabaso, is 14 years old, and the blurb correctly says he's undergoing a journey that he's perhaps far too young to undergo. He is taking on responsibilities such as searching for his mother, and it's incredibly dangerous, and he's leaving behind his siblings, and he shouldn't be doing this. But I guess what you're saying fundamentally in The Lost Language of the Soul is, when you are called to action, it's never at a convenient time. You'll perhaps always feel as though you shouldn't be doing this, but if not you, then who? Right. Yeah.
I think one of the most important lessons of life is that everything that's valuable, everything that has got to be found, that's why miners, they dig the ground, they dig the soil, they go deep underground to look for something valuable. And so for this boy, his mother is a valuable part of his life. And so he goes through all the travails, all the ups and downs, nooks and crannies, looking for her. It's something that I've always believed in, that for us then to find that which is valuable, not only around us, but also in ourselves. We've got to dig deep. We've got to go through the pain. And at the end of the pain, of course, there's a reward.
You know, it's a mixed reward, possibly, as we'll see with Joseph's journey. But there's that at the beginning of his mission to find his mother, Joseph is in the back of a horse-drawn cart. Layla is helping him out. And he's grappling with a very big question, once again, possibly too big for a 14-year-old. And I wonder if you feel as though Joseph's character has answered this question by the time we come to the end of The Lost Language of the Soul. And this is what he's, bumping along in the cart, sort of thinking about between sleep and waking. And he says, it reads like this: Sputnik and Ryder are no longer talking. And for a panicked moment, Joseph imagines them also overcome by sleep, the horses trotting on out of pure instinct. Where would they take them, these horses? Perhaps to a paddock with endless supplies of bran and hay and oats, like the one he hears exists on a farm named Gonakudzingwa, which is run by Zimbabwean refugees. What is the difference between refugee, freedom fighter, and guerrilla, and terrorist? He remembers a debate involving his father, Gogo Mulugwa, Aunt Thelma, and Uncle Agrippa. Ma always stayed out of these debates, letting her sister argue on her behalf. So the question of violence, and when we decide to use it and employ it, and how we justify violence, is a big thread and becomes quite explosive towards the end of the book. does Joseph resolve this? Have you resolved this? And as someone, of course, who was in the struggle himself and who was in exile himself, we're speaking to the text and the writer of the text, and of course, each other and ourselves as people who are, you know, irrevocably tied to and involved in this text. Yeah.
I think the question of violence, it was a very fraught issue, especially in the evolution of the South African struggle. There was even a lot of involvement, even of the church, you know, for theological interpretations or explanations or justifications of violence. I mean, I think a tried one is, of course, Jesus using a whip to chase money changers and usurers and Pharisees from the temple. But in the main, I think it's written, it's ordained even in the, you know, chronicles of struggles in various jurisdictions, that violence against oppression can be countenanced and can be justified. That is why I think the ANC, Oliver Tambo especially, whenever he was presenting a January 8th statement, he always spoke about the people, the Polisario Front, that is the people of Western Sahara. He spoke about the Palestinian struggle. He spoke about the struggles of various parts of the world. And they gave us an understanding also of the inviolability of human dignity. The fact that any regime that stamps upon a people is a regime that's worth overthrowing. And sometimes violence comes into play. Of course, there are moral issues about violence. To what extent is it proportionate? I think those were the questions, for instance, that were broached very thoroughly, extensively during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But as a writer, I think I do understand violence. It's a moot question whether I myself would act violently. I don't know. Nobody knows.
Yeah. So violence as a device, or the purpose that it serves in the book itself, in Joseph Mabaso's journey, is, I guess, an important trigger, right? And I don't know if you've read, and I don't know why I even remembered this. I suddenly remembered a character in Sylvester Stein's book called Stuffness Pofolo, or at least one of his books. And for some reason, Stuffness Pofolo is befuddled. He remains throughout the book just constantly confused about his life and his situation in apartheid South Africa. And that's Joseph for the longest time. When we meet him, he's obviously a child, he's 14 years old, he's got childish concerns, he's living in Zambia. He doesn't have to worry about the struggle. He knows it's something that his dad is fighting, but his father disappears and comes back and disappears and comes back. They don't know the details of what the father's work, or of what Sobhuza's work entails. But as he goes along through this treacherous journey to find his mother, and he joins up with the guerrilla unit, he experiences and sees violence, which kind of clarifies him, right? It clarifies him, it brings him out of this more muddled state, and he becomes a more substantial character, I guess, ultimately. But not to say he's not scarred, not to say he's not traumatized, right? Not to say that it doesn't hurt him, obviously, as experiences like this do. But it does something, which is to make him choose or find himself in all of this mess. And I guess what I really, and something that you touched on about possibly what a messed up society we are, is how you sought through, or which characters you and their voices that you felt were the strongest and most able to choose in all the rubble, that this is what I hold on to, and these are ultimately my values. So in understanding why we're struggling, or in understanding the use of this violence, or in understanding why, as Chanda Mabaso, I let Sobhuza disappear for months on end, not knowing where my husband is, right? The character that you enjoyed the most, whose voice you enjoyed filling out and just giving life to, who was that?
Well, there were quite a number of characters. I enjoyed the character of Sis Violet, for instance, as I did of some of the minor characters, Charlie, some of the guerrillas.
Yeah.
Because in that violence, if you go back to that trope of violence, in the fact that they might have been brought up always fearing for their lives, always on the lookout for anything that might happen that could snuff them out. But in that, you still find nuggets of their humanity. One of the books I wrote a long time ago, I can't remember, someone described it as rather sneeringly as Langa's attempt at humanizing the inhuman face of the guerrilla fighter. And that is, the reality is that all of us are human beings, and all of us have got our own failures and foibles, and so on and so forth. And the guerrillas then that I portrayed, if you listen to them, they are reflected a lot through dialogue rather than action. They reminisce, they talk about things, they are irreverent about leadership. They say so many things which in other circumstances would be treasonable, but that is how they express their humanity.
Yeah.
And of course, Joseph himself, who was a clean canvas on whom I had to breathe a lot of life. And I found in writing him that I was revisiting a number of areas that I had not been to in my own youth, areas that had frightened me and had also made me understand what life is all about. And so to answer your question, there are a number of figures. I enjoyed Gogo Mulubwa because she's a thread that connects the Zambian struggle, the anti-colonial struggle, to the South African struggle, to the struggle of the people in the Southern African region, or to stretch it even more, of the whole African continent.
Yeah. You know, now that you brought up Gogo Muluba, have you ever been aware of, and perhaps this is something you were also working out in the book, but I guess the frustration of the younger generations, that those that were in the struggle don't talk about their experiences as candidly as we actually need them to, not as they ought to or as they would like to, but ultimately as we need them to, right? For the benefit of continuity and fully understanding what went into the struggle liberation. Gogo Mulubwa herself is, and that Gogo Mulubwa being Joseph's grandmother, maternal grandmother, who is, I guess, has her struggle credentials in the Zambian struggle, but it's mentioned quite quietly, quickly, and we don't go into it. Neither does she, neither does Chanda, Joseph's mom. So it's a taking for granted of their role, maybe a downplaying of their role. The same through line that we see a lot in our own conversations around the struggle in South Africa. There are those headline names, but you mention Cuatro quite a few times, right? In the book, the fact that this is a specter that hangs over these guerrilla fighters should they put a foot wrong, being imprisoned in Cuatro or being shot by a firing squad. And I mean, I'm mentioning the more gruesome aspects, but it's a textured and nuanced, it was a textured and nuanced experience that we don't have the full benefit of. Did you want to, I guess, hammer that home, that for whatever reason, older generations don't talk about it?
The one thing I wanted to hammer was the connectedness. This whole generational dialogue that we're all supposed to be having, why it's very, very important. And I saw this when we met in Tanzania. Some of the MK guerrilla fighters who were now old people, who had been in Wanki, Sipolilo, who had trained in ever so many incredible places like Morocco, like Algeria, Soviet Union, and Somalia. And so you meet those people and they've got a story to tell. Are we willing to listen to those stories? We only remember those stories when something happens in our lives that reminds us of something that they said at a specific moment. And then you realize that it's happening again in your own circumstances. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I talk about in the book about these guys we call umgwenya, these old people. And we used to, tease them and say to them that we are here, the June 16 generation, we're coming here, we'll train for 6 months. After that, we're going home, we're going to fight the wars, we're going to liberate South Africa.
We're going to settle this thing.
And then I found myself spending from 1976, I only returned home in 1990 or 1994, almost 19 years outside. The others have stayed 30 years and some. So what I'm trying to say is that we use this phrase, pick up the baton, pick up somebody's spear. We have to be able to make sense of this continuity or continuum. And what is it that we reap from? What nuggets do we mine from the memories of those people that our predecessors? So now we are the timers, we're the old
Sure.
The young lions come and say, what are you guys doing? We're going to take this thing and run with it. And the young lions are now no longer able to roar anymore. They've grown old, So what do we do? What do we do with the collective consciousness, knowledge that has been, put in this cauldron, into this pot through the ages?
And just to the point of memory, remembering, what did you draw on in terms of, because of course, as you say, you are 19 years out there in exile, in the wilderness. I always, how we use these phrases, in the wilderness, and then you remember, which actually this is a biblical phrase, and you don't know the scripture well at all. So you probably aren't using it in context. So you have to stop yourself. But I'm wondering what you drew on, or how you jogged your memory, or the kinds of conversations that you had to revisit, because of course, as you say, the experiences were so varied. You were there for 19 years, other people were in exile for much, much longer. But then of course, it's the referencing of what people were experiencing, whilst those that didn't leave home, that stayed at home. It's also the referencing of experiences of people who were in Umkhonto weSizwe, who were in the various training camps, as you say, who trained in various territories. And we see that represented in the book, right? Sis Violet's unit speaking in Portuguese or Russian or wherever it was that they trained. And we see that coming through. But what did you reference and what are the kind of conversations you had? Because to the point of humanity, once again, it was so clear and apparent that to be able to have worked and stayed motivated or remained on mission or undertaken missions during this time was a heroic feat, as far as I'm concerned, despite the atrocities, despite the mistakes were made, because there's the distrust between your erstwhile colleagues and comrades, between your erstwhile, I guess, saviors or hosts in whatever country you happen to have been settled in. You have to remain on mission whilst at the same time not knowing if you're still safe or if you're still compromised. The bravery that takes, the stoicism that takes is quite incredible. So I think you can't help but feel the humanity of the guerrillas. Who all did you talk to to remind yourself of this, or us?
Well, I was lucky. I've been lucky, and I feel bereft now because one of my anchors, one of the people I really relied on when it came to going through the corridors of memory was Praveen Jose.
Yes.
The late Praveen. He passed away in January in 2018. And with him, I always discussed a number of these issues. And of course, now I've got my other Prawili in the form of Barbara Masigela, Sis Barbara Masigela,
Yeah.
whom I speak to because we come from that experience of exile, of the world, of understanding what's happening even internationally. And so you have asked people that it is possible for Joseph to think the way he does, to speak the way he does. A small story, my daughter is the one that reminded me of the spirit that lives in that river, the Zambezi, which the guerrillas crossed.
Yes.
And so as a writer, you are a sponge. You go around the world trying to find things, anything. You are like what do you call these people who go around the sea, on the seashore, the beachcombers, finding things.
Yes.
And then when you get home, you look at them and say, what is it that I can use? In those things, of course, there are books, there are maps, there are all sorts of conversations that you have with people. When it comes to, for instance, a character like Violet, she was between 20 today, at a time when South Africa is undergoing this very, very violent war against women. And so it's not like I'm a crusader, but I do feel as a writer, you have to throw your own little contribution towards making sure that certain things are given the kind of respect that they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course, as I said at the top of our conversation, time, right? It always flies by, and we're going to have to dip into, and I'm excited to dip into the question and answer section of our conversation shortly. But I got to say that towards the end of the book, I kind of felt like I became a sort of petulant child, very upset at how these grown-ups never tell us anything. They keep us in the dark. The grown-up in this instance is the adults in the book, perhaps you, Mandla, the writer. These adults don't tell us anything because we uncover some great big family secrets, once again, in a very offhand manner, somewhere in a bus terminal late at night, just like that. And we have to deal with the implications of this new revelation, the same way Joseph also has to deal with the implications of this revelation. And I thought, again, this is perfect. This is how you write about a country. This is how you write about family and relationships. And this is how you actually illustrate that the apartheid struggle, the struggle against apartheid, was one, as you say, and as Sondo Vabaza, says towards the very, very end, that the Nats infiltrated, I guess we talk about, you're writing about the political structure, but what they've done is infiltrate the intimate, the personal, the familial, the emotional, the mental, and it's a long game that they're playing. And so after this long journey that we've come through with Joseph, that's the reminder, right? And the struggle isn't over, obviously.
Not by
and
a
I
long
thought, wow, Mandla, why would you do this to us? There's no tidy end to the story with a bow on it.
No, there's no tidy end. And as I say, I think the phrase, the struggle continues, is very, very, in ever so many ways, because we are just at the beginning of that long war that the Nationalist Party and its military and security apparatus unleashed upon us. I think we need to remember, and I can't forget this, in 1991, just before, or at the time of the talks, or before that, CODESA, the amount of shredding, the trucks that were full of documents, what was in those documents that is now beginning to come up today with all the fire that you are seeing all over South Africa? What is it about the past? Someone said, the future is certain, it is the past that is unpredictable. What is it in that hidden past that is now rearing its ugly head and menacing all of us every day?
Yeah.
These are some of the questions we've got to deal with.
Sure. On that note, please do pardon my tardiness. I am running a few minutes behind in our schedule, but let's start the Q&A section of the conversation. Let's start with this, and a character that you've touched on. This is a question from Ezekiel Kekana asking, okay, first of all, he says, I've enjoyed reading this book. Just a quick question to Mandla Langa. Can you talk to us about creating the character of Violet and the importance of her character throughout the story, especially how she came to shape the larger part of Joseph's thinking? I think you've touched a little bit on that, or quite a bit on that. But Ezekiel's further question is also, while I accept this is a work of fiction, does Ndade believe there are still many Mbizos in government and in the ANC? So Umbizo, of course, being a treacherous character. Well, how do you describe him? Has he been turned? Is he, yeah, if you could just.
Yeah. Mbizo is a casualty of the security apparatus that I spoke about, and is someone that was unleashed upon the liberation struggle and then rose to the highest councils of the movement. So the long and short of it, I spoke about the shredding of ever so many documents. If you read Perry Gilda's book, the list, you will find certain resonances, and that will possibly help answer the question of whether we do have long-term molds, in the higher councils of our movement. I believe we do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, speaking of Barry Gilda writing here, for the detail of place, culture, language, atmosphere, how much was memory, research, and imagination? I guess you'll re-up on a previous question about how you jogged your memory. Yeah.
Memory is a very crazy thing in the sense that you sometimes do not remember that you are remembering. It comes as a feeling sometimes. And for me, that is why many people, exiles especially, and I'm sure Perry is familiar with this, you will go into a cinema and watch just a normal run-of-the-mill movie. And somewhere along the line, the interaction between the characters will cause you to collapse and weep. You read a book, you hear a story, and suddenly it touches a certain node in you. And that node is what you have gone through in the past, or what others like you have gone through in the past, which has been communicated to you. And you must also remember that we've got muscle memory, we've got the memory of trauma, lasts quite a number of generations. And so these are some of the things which we as writers, or as artists, or as broadcasters, or as poets, dancers, have got to find a way of interpreting and using and making sure that they become a repository of a bigger community.
Mm. Mm. Sure. I'm gonna touch on a lighter question before I go to quite a heavy one. And this is Veronica Napier, just basically saying, the magical way you're describing writers as beachcombers surely means you're always thinking of writing stories. Are you writing another book? Oh, Veronica, we've just read this one.
I am writing another book, Veronica, and I hope it will be much lighter. And I'm thinking about the YA, the young adults. So it's a constituency that I would like to familiarize myself with.
Yeah. And actually, that's quite interesting. I really enjoy young adult fiction. And just really quickly, you're saying you're hoping it'll be lighter. I think what I find really compelling about YA is, yes, it's young adult fiction, but it's a genre which tackles some surprisingly very important topics, and even heavy topics, even big issues, right?
Yes, true.
In such a compelling way. I'm keen to find out, how you think you're going to tackle that. Just very quickly, I'm slipping in my own question there.
Yeah, well, I did speak earlier about my children. They don't know this, but they are the ones that help me make sense of a number of things. And so I look through their literature, I look through their books, and so this is where I will start mining what it is that I'm going to be writing.
Oh, absolutely looking forward to it. All right, let's move on then. Here's one from an anonymous attendee, and it reads, I was in Mandla's neighborhood when Ben Langa, his brother, was assassinated. Tears filled Mandla's eyes every time he discussed the incident and the bewildering intrigue that it presented to him at the time. For days, Mandla could not sleep. He asked everybody he was close to, including me, about what that grave incident meant to the meaning of life, to the meaning of struggle and human fate. Mandla is a non-fiction author, not fictional, but artistically sensitive.
That's a heavy one, yes, yeah.
Yeah, it is a heavy one. I guess the question that, there are many questions in that, but I guess the question in that being, that observation that you're in fact not a fictional writer, but that you're artistically sensitive.
Well, I try to draw on ever so many of even my own lived experience, but I've got to fight very hard against letting those experiences determine the route I'm going to take in writing. But yeah, it's true what she says.
Sure. Let's see what more we have. Let's see. Okay, actually, it says this one's from Eileen saying, thank you for an incredible book. And thank you both for a deep engagement with it. This book comes from your MA in creative writing. What is the process like compared to your other novels? Yeah, I guess that you've actually got that in your acknowledgements, right, at the end of the book, where you said this novel originated as part of a master's in creative writing at Wits University.
I think one thing that was very, very, very helpful and eye-opening about the MA course was I was among a very wonderful group of people. And so we shared experiences. And so there's a peer review kind of thing. And they helped in many, many ways to shape some of the characters and their points of view, because they didn't mince any words. They told you straight up that Joseph can't think like that. He's 14 years old. You know, so it's a very helpful course, and I would recommend it to anyone who's involved in writing, especially for old writers who have accumulated a lifetime of bad habits.
All right, noted. I like that. All right, I see we've still got our 49 participants still in the chat. What I didn't do is ask you what your time looked like, but I think I'm going to take two final questions, if you don't mind, Mandla, and then we'll wrap for the afternoon. Is that okay with you?
That's fine with me. I'm hoping that Kai is one of the participants. Kai is in the US.
Yeah.
And her birthday today or yesterday. So I wanted to say happy birthday to her, and to Vanessa also, our relative who's also out there in the United States.
Yeah.
I've got time. Thanks.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. Kai, Vanessa, I hope you're there in the chat and part of our participants as you receive a big shout out at this virtual launch. So this one is from Trisha, who says, thank you for such a deep reflection on some of the threads in the book, dear Mandla. Do you feel a sense of relief having gotten this past captured? And she says, of course, only partially in writing, or is that feeling of responsibility a constant?
I think I feel both. I feel there were so many things I wanted to say, and I was able to say them through the book. And as you well know, fiction is very, very helpful in the sense that you can tilt at windmills. You can say things that you cannot by any stretch of the imagination say in nonfiction. I saw these constraints, for instance, when I was working on Mandela's Dare Not Linger. But then at the same time, that as a writer, you can only stop once you get senile or you die, because it's something that lives in you. It's a worm that always needs to be fed. And so, you've got a responsibility. And so the struggle is still going on.
Yeah. And just to give you a response to your earlier comment, Kai is right here saying, you're amazing, Mandla. Thanks very much. I'm listening to your wonderful discussion. So Kai is accounted for. Thanks for letting us know. Here's another question and comment from Philippa de Villiers saying it's been a privilege to have watched the progression of this idea to its realization. The challenge about writing is growing readers. Do you have a set of readings and discussions that will also grow the habit of reading with young people? Big question.
Hi, Philippa, how are you? I think growing readers, growing young readers. I've got a friend who's a writer, who is a colleague, and who's somebody doing very wonderful things. And I'm learning from her. And that's Elinor Sisulu, who is growing readership in various languages. There are other writers like Fred Kumalo, who's also known as Brad Pitt, um, who are making forays into, the kind of audiences that have been left unattended and unaddressed. I think we have to find as many platforms as possible. We have to learn as many forms of writing as possible. So to reach, to grow that whole pot of writers and of readers. For instance, we spoke of young adults. You know that one of the gateways into reading is via the other media, other television, for instance, if used properly, can help to grow readership or can be a gateway towards reading.
I think, sure, it's a big, I mean, that is a big question, isn't it? But it's also a very important one that, when you think of statistics that were true 10 years ago, and they still are in 2021, that 1 in 10 schools has a library. I know where I learned to, where I picked up the love for reading. It was definitely at home, right? It was definitely at home, watching and having parents and grandparents who read and who spoke about literature and who debated things, openly in the family. But it was also knowing that I went to school where I had a librarian who was passionate. I would not only read, but I would take out comic books from school, take home cassette, audiobooks on cassette back then, So the way in which we engaged with books and it was just there. It wasn't a struggle. It wasn't a matter of books are expensive. There's so much more. I mean, I think authors and you can do all you do in terms of access and language and genres and how you tell stories. But so many other things need to start happening. And I think it really needs to start happening.
But, I think there's also a responsibility. We should not let government off the hook.
Sure.
Because if you look at other countries, smaller countries with GDPs that are littler than ours, who promote books as much as possible, you find books being ubiquitous everywhere. Books in bus stops, books in libraries, and the incentivization of writing, of creativity. That's what grows the industry. And it's something that we need to be fighting for almost every day. And of course, you spoke about the tax on paper. That is not right. It's something that should be dealt with, I think, very comprehensively.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess a final question, Mandla, from another one from Veronica. She notes that your book cover, or says it's the most beautiful book cover, and wonders, was this your choice? And is there a story behind it?
The book cover was, I've got a friend in Nigeria. He's a writer, B. Bandele. He wrote Bema Boy. He's also a filmmaker. And so he took a photo. He put a photo, this picture on Facebook, and I saw it. And I said, B, I am appropriating this one. And so he got to be in touch with Andrea Natras from Macmillan. And that's how the cover came. I loved it, just love at first sight.
Yeah.
And I'm not sorry that I love the image, because I think...
Tell me what you love about the image, because what we're seeing are, I guess, expressions of just joy, abandon, in what looks like, you know, I don't want to call it an oppressive environment, but it's certainly not fancy. And yet these kids are laughing and smiling and are vibrant, right? They're energetic, they're full of life.
For me, that is the real lost language of the soul, because that joy you see being expressed is a joy that's being expressed in the most depressed area. But people have got it deep inside themselves to be able to exult, to enjoy, to be in community, to play and to be free. And so that is what, there is a certain vibrancy, there's a certain mobility in that image that I think is an idealized state for very many communities in our country.
All right, I lied. Final one, I promise. Sylvia Bollenhoffen says, thank you for your valuable and visionary voice. If books are food for the soul, are we not in danger of spiritual starvation given the poor sales figures for most books? Can we force feed the nation?
Well, I think it's a very, very important question and speaks about ever so many structural issues, the issues of the economy. But you look at countries like Hungary. Hungary was a very small country of 11 million, but they were able, through a very, very vibrant campaign, to promote the small contribution of Hungarian writers by making sure that every book that has been written locally is in schools, is a set book. How many of our works find themselves being prescribed? It's very, very, it's not happening in any comprehensive way. And so these are some of the measures that I believe perhaps can be evolved that could help to promote our literature. And I think people should find leisure time to be given leisure time to read. I see that one of the people is Mandla Langa, my daughter. I'd like to say, hi, Linda, how are you? That's another person who went through exile with me in ever so many places, and so much of some of the, because characters are a composite of your past experience.
Sure. Characters are composites of your past experiences. Do you ever think, as you write in the descriptions or characteristics of within those composites, and think, shucks, if so-and-so recognizes themselves in this, I have plenty of answering to do?
Well, I think that the one thing good about writing, especially if you are writing and then you know the experiences of guerrillas, you know how to hide things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking part in this conversation and joining us for what was promised to be 40 minutes, which has extended into an hour, essentially. I'm going to take a final comment, which reads like this. Thoroughly enlightened by this conversation, I'm going to get myself a copy. As one born in a township mid-70s, Hammersdale in KZN, caught in a serious political storm in the late 80s into mid-90s, I found it difficult to deal with political stories, but I will try it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And a final one from Ariana saying, congratulations, Mandla, and thank you for the great conversation. We really do thank you for the great conversation. To hop onto Ariana's words there, it's been incredibly enlightening and fun and joyful. And thank you so much for sharing so openly with us.
Thank you so much to everyone, those who ask questions and not. And thanks so much, Refiloe. Thanks a million.
It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you and getting to talk to you. Thank you all 49 of you for joining us, staying in, the questions, the comments. Once again, as Mandla said, it's been a pleasure. Just a reminder that Pan has posted the links to purchase the book in the chat, and you'll also get an email tomorrow with a link to this recording, as well as all those details on how you can buy your copy of The Lost Language of the Soul. Absolutely beautiful book. We really do thank you for putting in the work, the time to write about home, remind us who we are and remind us who we could be, and also remind us to dream.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much to everyone. Thanks, Refiloe.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.